Yes, hi, I'm Michael Yee. Thank you for having me back. I know last time I spoke a little bit on estate planning, but here I am again with some fellow members, Yousaf and Jennifer. I always like coming back to ACC. I know my family was big into ACC. Herbert and Inez Yee, they always like to donate and give back to this organization. Also, my mother, Helen Yee, she loved to play pickleball here a lot, and even she got me out here on the pickleball courts. I always love coming here to talk. Like I said, I mainly do estate planning. I always think of planning as a group exercise. So I mainly do the trust, but it's always a good idea to also have like a financial planner involved. And also I know Jennifer does a lot with charities and nonprofits, so it's always a good idea to have a team approach. So for now I'll have Jennifer talk about a little about what she does, and then we could go to Yousaf and then have any questions later on. So thank you.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Jennifer Stolo. I am with Thompson Associates, which is a value-based charitable estate planning organization that we love to help our nonprofits and their supporters and constituents in the community, just like yourselves out there. So thank you for having me today. I have spent 25 years in the nonprofit field, actually, and so I have been on the other side, actually, of using Thompson Associates as a client, and find it to be a very valuable experience, a wonderful company that has a lot of wonderful ideas that helps people like you out there. So we'll get started here with our slides. So how many out there have an estate plan? You guys have an estate plan, right? The answer is yes, we all have an estate plan. The question is it the estate plan that you want, or is it the estate plan that the state of California wants? And that's called probate. So we'll hit the slides here and we'll get started. So when we think of a typical estate plan, a lot of you that raised your hand and others think of the 5 different components here that we talk about. A trust, a will, a durable power of attorney, medical power of attorney, and advanced healthcare directive. These are the typical things you see in an estate plan. And a lot of times what people don't realize that we find that we have a lot of discussions around how we can make things look different as far as how we want to pass down our assets to our heirs. So if we take a look at this, there are 3 different deductions that we talk about: the federal estate tax deduction, the marital deduction, and the charitable deduction. So I'm going to talk a little bit today more about the charitable deduction. Because when we think about the federal estate tax, currently the assets that are worth $12.92 million are subject to federal taxes. So marital deduction, there's a different way we look at that, and that's an unlimited estate tax that can be passed over. But when we talk about charitable deductions, most of the times, in my opinion, actually, I think this is the most unused tool. And a lot of people don't realize that. It's nothing to say about estate attorneys. It's not really a conversation that generally comes up. They're there to do some of those 5 components that we just talked about and draft those documents for you so that you have a will. You can put that in the trust. But a lot of times these conversations don't come up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this just so that you can have a good idea of some things that you may want to bring up as you think about this moving forward. So if we take a look at this pyramid here, and we start kind of from the bottom, financial independence. When we talk about financial independence, we're really talking about how we are thinking about how we're building our wealth over our lifetime, and how that creates some kind of financial independence for us. As we move to the next top part of the pyramid, the family legacy, this is where we start thinking about taking that wealth and how do we pass that on to our heirs. Heirs can be children, grandchildren, friends, any family members when we talk about heirs. It is where we want to take that accumulated wealth and how we want to pass it down when we're no longer here. So what I want to talk about, though, is this top part here. When we talk about taxes versus gifts, we can look at things a different way. Every plan has tax implications. Oftentimes we don't realize to that extent. Every individual or couple are very different based on the tax bracket they're in, based on the amount of assets they have, but there is a tax implication at the end of the day. So when we look at that and really dive deeper into that and run numbers, we can look at that there's an opportunity to actually utilize the charitable side of things to avoid some of those taxes. So I always talk about these 3 buckets, okay? There are only 3 places that your estate can go, just these 3. So your heirs, as we just talked about, that group of individuals and what that can look like, the government, because there are tax implications, and charity. So those are the three. Many times when we think about our estate plan, this is what we assume it looks like. 100% to heirs, nothing to the government, nothing to charity. Because oftentimes when we're planning these documents, we're just planning about where we want it to go. But when we drill down and look at some numbers, it oftentimes looks like this. 70% to our heirs, 30% to government, and 0% to charity. So a lot of times people say to me, wow, I didn't quite realize that. Is there anything I can do about that? And there is actually. Oftentimes we can start to create plans that look somewhat like this. And a lot of times this has a lot to do with certain tools that just aren't in regular conversations when we're doing our estate planning. And so as we look at some of these tools, I describe Thompson Associates and we as associates as architects, estate architects. I do have a legal team assigned to me, but we actually sit down with individuals and couples and go through a series of questions about goals, values, legacy, and really create the plan. So it's kind of like if you were building a custom home. You wouldn't run out and get the builder, right, and build it. You'd actually get an architect, and you'd create a blueprint, and you'd walk through all the things that you want in your kitchen, your master bathroom, your backyard, the swimming pool. That's what this looks like. It's a master plan blueprint that we create over 3 to 4 different conversations, meetings that we have, and then we create that blueprint so that you can take it to your personal advisors, ones that we can recommend for you, your estate planning attorneys, and then create the final look of how you want this to be after we explore through everything. So when we talk about some of those charitable tools, these are just, this is what I kind of want to put out to you so that you get some ideas and thoughts and words and tools in your mind. Typically, a lot of what we see is a good way to utilize this charitable deduction is through your retirement plans. While you're living in your IRA, your required minimum distribution that some of you may know that you have to do, obviously every year, there's income tax on that. And so oftentimes people don't think about that they could actually take that as an IRA charitable rollover and give it to their charity. It will not be a charitable deduction for you, but it will alleviate the income tax. And so many times people don't want to take that. They know they have to take the income tax. They'd rather do something with it. So this is something that you can do in your lifetime. Thinking about in your lifetime and after, you can also take these retirement plans and create beneficiary designations. And that can be all or in part a certain percentage. This is a very taxable entity that will be implemented as you pass that down to your heirs. And so there's different ways that you can take those tools so that your heirs are not taking on that tax. There's other things too, charitable gift annuities, charitable remainder trusts, where you can create income streams for yourself or your loved ones while you're living, as well as for your loved ones after you are no longer here. So there's some other tools in there, and those are different ways to approach different ways to reduce your taxes. Outright donation of appreciated assets, stock investments. You can think about where you bought them. Hopefully many of you bought Apple, right? So you bought it at one value and it's way up here. So you have capital gains in there when you sell off your stocks. There's different ways that you can literally transfer those over to a charitable entity of your choice, ACC or any other charity, and alleviate that. As well as property, different things. Those are different ways to avoid some of those capital gains. One other thing I'd just like to put in here too is some of these estate planning trends that we're seeing. So often it used to be the estate plan that I call it the I love you plan. When I die, everything goes to my husband, and after he dies, everything goes to our children in equal amounts. That's the I love you plan, and a lot of times people have that. But the trend, it's very interesting to be thinking about. There's a lot of unique ways of planning because a lot of people are thinking about things. This is just one example of giving 20% at the time of death outright to heirs, and then looking at maybe 40% of that on an annual basis, more of an income stream, and then 40% as a lump sum. People think of an age, 25, 35, 45. This is a lot of what we're seeing in the trends going on right now, that it's not this outright. We hear a lot of conversations about, my children are very successful. They don't need all of this. I'd like to make some charitable gifts. Or my children aren't ready for this amount of money. So how do I look at this differently so that they're getting what they need now, they're getting what they need over time, and maybe they're getting a lump sum that will really help them launch a company or something in the future. We'll have some questions here at the end, but I appreciate your time, and my role here is just to kind of give you an overview of thinking about different ways that you can look at your estate planning in a different way that helps eliminate taxes, but can also give to your favorite charities as well. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Yousaf Zamanudin. I'm a financial advisor with Bank of America Merrill Lynch. First and foremost, I want to thank Michael Yee and ACC for inviting me out here to speak with you fine folks. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been with Merrill for the past few years. I started with the industry in 2012, so it's been just a little over a decade now. What I do on a day-to-day basis is help our clients invest and manage their money to meet certain goals. And we do that using a variety of different portfolio management techniques that I'll review with you. I'll review a portion of them with you today, and hopefully you can take something away from that. My portion of the conversation today is about protecting your investment assets. And that's sort of it's kind of a broad category of things to touch on. So what we do whenever I hear that from our clients, we start by first addressing or figuring out what is it we're protecting the asset from, and then who we're protecting it for, and then we figure out how to protect it. So it's an equation that has a lot of moving parts, but really figuring out what it is that we're protecting and what are we protecting it from. Some examples of more popular things too of clients that come to us and say, I want to protect it from this, that, or the other. Typically, it's protecting it from the market volatility or performance and the risk that comes with investments. Also, to Jennifer's point, with taxes, not paying too much to Uncle Sam or an excessive amount that we don't need to. It could be protecting it from your beneficiaries or your children. Maybe, for some reason, this has been a little bit of a trending thing that's been happening more and more, where a lot of beneficiaries are not really equipped to handle the amount of money that's being transferred over to them. And a lot of times when it's sort of like lottery winners, when they get a lump sum of money that they're not used to, usually it goes away really fast. So the goal when somebody comes to work with us is to, especially if they have generational type of wealth, is really to try to find a way to pass it on for generations to come. So there are a variety of different tools and strategies, and I'll highlight a few of them today. So I told you about myself. With regards to, I'll start with the investment aspect of it, because that's my specialty, and I'll leave the trust and charitable part to Jennifer and Mike. So with the investment aspect of it, so this is what we call the macro risk, or the more of the higher view type of risk when it comes to investing. A lot of it will sort of circle around market risk and volatility. Those are sort of one and the same. Inflation and interest rate risk are another proponent that sort of work with each other. Currency risk for the U.S. and for U.S. investors hasn't been too big of a challenge, at least in the past few decades. But typically, especially right now, inflation risk and interest rate risk is a big topic, and we're all feeling it. So we'll talk about that. We'll actually touch on it a little bit right now. So with inflation risk, what happens with inflation is, and right now I think we're still at close to a 40-year high with inflation. And what happens for the Federal Reserve, for them to try to control inflation or the supply of money that's sort of rotating around, they have a variety of different tools to sort of combat that. But the more popular one that they typically utilize is controlling interest rates. And right now they're increasing interest rates. And what happens with increasing interest rates is the current yields or prices on existing bonds or fixed income type of products, they start to devalue, because now an investor can go out in the open market and buy something that's at a higher rate. So You can see this evident in some of the recent bank failures with Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic Bank. They had a large sum of bond portfolios that were issued by the United States government. At the time that they purchased it, it was a great rate for that time. However, interest rates have risen. Their portfolios declined in value. There was a rush on the bank. And unfortunately, they didn't have enough assets at that point because of the devaluing to cover those withdrawal requests. So that's more of the macro level. The really main point I want to touch on this topic is the company risk or issuer risk, which you see a lot of with concentrated positions. So to Jennifer's point with Apple, great company, or you might have someone that really heavily invests in Tesla. That's been a really popular one. But when you start overly concentrating into these companies, you start increasing your company risk. And what happens is you're sort of putting all your eggs in one basket. And when you do that, sure, you can have great returns. However, you're also increasing your chances of the company potentially going under. And if that happens, then your portfolio is really at risk because you have everything in that one position. So diversifying and using some of the different principles that we'll talk about in a moment, I think will help. So there's a lot of different fundamentals and principles that we utilize when we create our portfolios. Primary ones are asset allocation, diversification, which sort of are kind of married to each other. And then rebalancing, which rebalancing encompasses a lot of different things within it. Dollar cost averaging, buying lows, selling high, those type of fundamentals. But I want to stick to these. So with asset allocation, diversification, essentially when you have a certain goal that you're trying to reach or a target you're trying to hit, you have to figure out what sort of a mix of an investment strategy really works for you. And once you figure that out and you create this sort of asset allocation, then you have to diversify the allocation enough to where your market risk that we talked about just a little bit ago is reduced so that you're not going in tandem with how the market is performing, unless that's something you're trying to achieve. But for the most part, especially for retirees and those who are taking distributions, you want to reduce your market risk as much as possible. So these are the fundamentals of what we look at when we create portfolios. I'll come back to the slide. This is really to illustrate just about 100 years of market performance through different asset classes, large company stocks, small company stocks, and then some government bonds, and treasury bills, which is short-term government debt. And just comparing and we use the compound rate of return as a more conservative figure, and then the risk, what the risk really illustrates is volatility. So it's called standard deviation, but essentially it's just a way to measure volatility. So for example, with the large stocks, average over the 100 years, just about 100 years, it's averaged about 10%. However, within any point in time, that could have been a positive 28% or a negative 8%. And to be more conservative, sometimes we multiply the standard deviation or the volatility times 2 to project out that way, and that makes our projections a little more conservative. So we'll come back to this in just a moment. This is market risk. So this is illustrated by using the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest U.S. companies that are publicly traded. So there's a lot of time throughout the past 50 or 60 years that the S&P has been tracked that we've had big market corrections and recessions, contractions, and so on. Over time, however, if you're a long-term investor, I mean, it's evident, as you can see, if you're a long-term investor, it'll work out in your favor. But the challenge is really figuring out where the market is now, how to really get allocated to where it's best for you, and then what kind of strategy do we need to stick to so that the ride for us is really as smooth as possible. And the way we do that is diversifying. And how we diversify is really trying to find different assets or investments that are not moving in tandem with each other, that are not positively correlated. And this is just a few assets, just to keep it simple, but if I had showed you all the assets, it would be pages and pages. Alternative, real estate, hedge funds, so on and so forth. There's a bunch of assets that we can use to diversify your portfolio and bring down that volatility. So as you can see, the small stocks and large stocks, they really kind of move together. just about, but then treasury bills and intermediate government bonds, they almost are somewhat negatively correlated, so they move at different times. So if stock market's going up, then government treasuries and intermediate bonds might go down, or vice versa. If stocks are going down, then those might go up just slightly. So having those different sort of moving parts, especially as uncorrelated as possible, into a portfolio will help lower down the volatility and increase your diversification. And for some investors who are very conservative or think they're conservative by investing in 100% bonds or 100% into market-tied CDs or treasuries or so forth, doing that also has a lot of risk. And it's been shown that if you have in just an entire bond portfolio, your risk is actually higher than if you incorporate some stocks or some other type of asset classes that are more negatively correlated. Because just like the example with the banks that went under, having all your eggs in one basket, whether it be the more conservative bonds, it could take a left turn because those bond portfolios do devalue. So if you had purchased the bond portfolio like 2 years ago, right now it might still be down in the double digits, even though they're fixed bonds. So having some different type of assets that are negatively correlated or not perfectly correlated will help in the diversification effect. So this is really important, especially in the last couple of years, where more so the day trading or active trading has become more and more popular since COVID, especially. A lot of people will try to time the market or try to figure out when the bottom hits so that they can put their cash to work, or figure out what the top of the market is so they can pull out and then go back in at the bottom of the market. But we've seen over time that market timing does not work because it's impossible. You have to figure out really what the top of the market is, and you have to get so much information to really figure that out, and even then something surprising could happen. And then once you figure out if you see the top and then you pull out, then you have to predict when the bottom is so you can get back in. So essentially it's really impossible. And what this shows is in the 2008 financial crisis, if you were to take out money from your portfolio and then try to get back in a year later, you could see the variance with the returns if you had just stayed invested with the top part, and then the middle is if you get back in a year after you divested. So just staying on course and staying invested is really helpful. So this sort of illustrates a high withdrawal rate versus maybe a more moderate or lower withdrawal rate. So the more money you take out at the beginning of your retirement, so in the first phase, in the first few years in the phase of retirement, if the more you take out, the more it impacts the later on time frame. So 4% difference in the beginning, or in the withdrawal rate versus, so if you take 8% in the beginning throughout, or if you take 4%, the 4% will actually last you about 20% or 20 years longer. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is market volatility. If you have a riskier portfolio, let's say you're 100% into the S&P 500, which is sort of like a moderate type of investment, but if you're in that and the market starts going down, and on top of that you're taking distributions, now that's called sequence risk, which now you're taking money out of the accounts on top of the market volatility. So you're taking money out, market's going down, you'll really never come back to where you were because you've taken principal out now on top of the money that's declined. So you have to be careful in the beginning phases of retirement not taking too much money out, because what'll happen is it'll shorten the lifespan of your assets. So these are some ways to really kind of protect your investment assets from market volatility and market performance, especially if you're overly concentrated and not diversified. So I hope that helps a bit. And now let's say you do all that really well. The other challenge comes with behavioral finance or emotions when that sort of kicks in. And this highlights the investment cycle in more of a behavioral finance type of approach. And in 2020, you could kind of see a lot of emotions when the lockdowns first got announced and the market dropped 30%. And there was no really backing to that other than a lot of emotions and speculation as to the economy not really opening back up. However, things rolled on, and then we found ways to adapt, and the market bounced back within just a few months and actually did really well. And for the next 2 years, the market did very well. However, a lot of people started getting into investing closer to the top of the market, so closer to that excitement and thrill and euphoric type of feeling, especially if you remember the GameStop saga and AMC and a lot of those other sort of meme stocks. And then it's hard once you get in there, because you're at the top, it's really hard to know when to get out. So then you start declining, and then all these other emotions kick in, and a lot of people will pull out during the panic or the depression phase, and that's usually when you want to actually get in the market. So you have to be careful of not letting emotions get involved in your investment decisions, and really keep the objective in mind. So if you do all that well, you'll get your target, and the ride might still be a little volatile. However, once you have the strategy, the volatility won't matter to you as much, because you have an endpoint and you understand that the volatility is normal and healthy in any market. So if you know that going into it, volatility here and there will not affect you too much, because you have the end goal. So that's on the investment portion. I'm going to leave the essential estate planning part of this to Mike and Jennifer. They're a little more experienced in this and specialize in this. So I'm not going to touch too much on this, but essentially just making sure you have some different things set up during your life. The only part I want to touch on this portion of the slide is the beneficiary designations. You'd be surprised how many people don't have beneficiaries on their retirement accounts, and it's a very tiresome process for your beneficiaries to get access to your retirement accounts if you don't have beneficiaries. So key takeaway, just make sure you have beneficiaries on your retirement accounts, because it's a pain for your beneficiaries if you don't. Now, with retirement accounts, most people are sort of familiar with the different type of retirement accounts. You have traditional and Roth. Traditional being tax deferred. When you start taking withdrawals, you have to pay income tax, as Jennifer mentioned, especially during the RMD stage. The government wants their taxes, so they require you to take it out at 73 now. With the Secure Act that came into place, Secure Act 2.0, I think it changed it to 73. So you have to start taking those distributions at 73. And to Jennifer's point, you can take that RMD and actually move it into charity and avoid essentially paying some of that income tax. So great strategy. The Roth IRAs, you don't have to take out RMDs, which is great. So some clients will start doing conversions early on in their retirement phase, especially if their income isn't all that high, so that when they reach 73, they don't have to take those RMDs for that portion of it. So that's a strategy that's used from time to time. Rollover IRAs is just when you move over your 401k or 403 or 457 over to an IRA. I want to talk about trustee IRAs for just a moment. So trustee IRAs are a way to have your IRA in a format that sort of resembles a trust or an estate plan. Typically, if you appoint your trust as a beneficiary of your IRA, and your trust gets those assets, it could potentially cause a double taxation issue, where it gets paid out to the trust and then it gets paid out to the beneficiary. It's usually a better format if you just have the beneficiaries be the direct beneficiaries instead of having a trust. However, these trusted IRAs, they've been around for a long time. They're just not well known. It allows you to, again, have that sort of a estate type of structure in IRAs. You can appoint specific beneficiaries, and with the Secure Act to mention, so before 2020, if you were to pass away, if I was to pass away, my kids would then inherit my IRA, and if I was taking my RMDs, because they're minors, they wouldn't have to take it, but if my kids were 21 or 23, then the IRA that they would have inherited, they would have to start taking those distributions when they turn RMD age. With the Secure Act, now if they inherited, and if they're the age majority, then they have to take those distributions within 10 years. So if you have a large IRA, say $1 million, that means they have to either take a lump sum, or because they're a qualified beneficiary, they can spread it out between 10 years. Some trusts that inherit IRAs don't always qualify for that stretch, so then the trust immediately has to take out the entire distribution, and there's other situations like that. But the trustee IRAs allows you to have this stretch happen, and then you can dictate how you want them to get the money and when. So within that 10 years, you can say, I want my daughter to get $100,000 a year, and that's it. Or you can say, I want them to get the minimum for the first 8 years, and then when she turns 30, I think she'll be more mature, then give her the rest. So it's a way of sort of having control after. So it's a great strategy that's used as a part of an estate plan, because again, putting your IRAs in a more traditional type of trust is not the most beneficial thing to do when it comes to not paying the most amount of taxes. So health savings accounts, I won't talk too much about this. The only thing to really take away is if you're not retired or if you're early on and if you have a HSA account, you can use the HSA for Medicare premiums, Part A, B, and D, I believe, and then also some other qualified purchases. It's a great way to, especially during your working life, to accumulate some tax-deferred growth because they can be invested, and then use it during your retirement age. So, long-term care insurance. This is very important, and it's been more and more. It's been coming up more and more because long-term care in California costs a little over $10,000 a month on average. So like I think $400 a day. It's really expensive. So you have to figure out during retirement, are you going to self-insure, or do you want to have some sort of supplemental insurance that will cover those costs? So it's very important to figure out, especially if you want some of your assets to go to your kids and become generational wealth. You don't want all this money unexpectedly to going to a long-term care facility that you wanted to go to your beneficiaries or heirs. So something to consider there. Life insurance, another way to protect your assets. You know, in our team, we don't typically use this all too much. The main reasons why we would use this as a part of our practice is we use it for potentially covering estate tax costs after death, or generational wealth sometimes. A lot of times we really use this only to cover certain liabilities, like if you have a mortgage or if you have some sort of big debt, business interest, something like that that needs to be paid, and you don't want your kids or your beneficiaries to be burdened with that, then we could use something like this. But there's a lot of ways you can use it, but those are typically how we use it in our practice. Revocable, irrevocable trusts, I'll leave that to Mike if you have any questions on it. So to Jennifer's point, the current gift tax exclusion is about $12 million. It's going to reduce down to about $6 million. It's at least scheduled to reduce down to about $6 million in 2026. So if your estate is bigger than that, there is specific sort of trust formations that would make it more efficient to move assets to maybe the next generation, so not your kids, but maybe your grandkids, and make that be transferred in a more efficient way. There's also other sort of advanced trust structures that are designed to maybe avoid certain legal measures and so on. That's a whole different conversation. It's very in-depth, and we can talk about this if you have any questions on that sort of thing. Philanthropy, Jennifer did a great job on this. There's not much I can add. The only thing is more institutional that a lot of investment firms offer is a donor advised fund. So what a donor advised fund does is you can essentially put money into this account that's intended for a charity or a qualified organization, and you generally get the tax benefits up front, but you don't necessarily have to give any specific organization the money right away. You can give it a few years from now, a decade from now, but you get the tax break right away. But the money that you put in there is irrevocable, so it has to go to charity at one point, but you can have it in there. It could be a lot of families will use it as a way to teach their kids and their grandkids and so on a way to be charitable. So they use it in that way. Or maybe you don't have a organization that you've identified yet, but you want to put something in an account like that gives you that sort of a tax benefit. You can do that and then transfer it to the charity at a later point. So that's really all I have. The only thing, again, is a trusted IRA is just if you have younger kids who are your beneficiaries, just it's really important for them to understand that any part of the RMDs that is not taken is subject to a 50% tax. So it's a very high tax. And actually with the Secure Act 2.0 that was just signed and went into effect this year, I think they reduced it to 25%, which is, I guess, better than 50, but you want them to be knowledgeable about this so that they don't have this sort of ramification if they don't utilize it in the right way. So that's all I have. I'll turn it back to Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think the next portion we want to know if any of you had any questions for us. So I think we're all going to come up together, and then you could ask either one of us any questions in particular you have. And we have our contact information on one of our slides. You can always contact us directly. But did anyone have any particular questions? And online as well, too? No? All right. Well, yes, so I thought that's a good point about long-term care insurance. So is there a typical cost? I know some of my clients are interested in looking in that, but they're always, I think, worried about the expense of that involved.
It gets more and more expensive the older you get. So typically the ideal client for something like that would be maybe in the 50s, 40s, maybe early 60s. But it gets more and more expensive as you get older and older. So you want to do it early on in life. If you don't do it, make sure your kids have something. A lot of employers will offer some sort of program with that, which is really great. But if they don't, then look into it on your own and see what's out there. It's really cheap the younger you are. And it gets, again, more and more expensive. But and long-term care, along with healthcare and education, increases at a higher pace of inflation than just normal money does. So it's at about 6 to 7% that increases or inflates. And regular cash and money is usually around 2.9 or 3%. So really important to have a plan or a strategy in place for long-term care.
Yeah.
Is there a pre-existing exclusion or condition exclusion?
Yeah, every issuer. So what we do at Merrill, and I always tell my clients to shop around to different places, but what we do is we sort of broker out the policy, and we run the information through a few different partners, and we kind of pre-vet the insurance companies, because a lot of the policies, life insurance, annuities, all these sort of life insurance products are backed by the issuer or the insurance company, and if the insurance company goes under, then the long-term care might just be of no value to you. So we vet the insurance companies to make sure that they're going to be solvent. Like AIG in 2008 almost went under, and that would have been a really big issue. So you have to make sure you get a good life insurance company, but there are exclusions, and every provider has different exclusions. So that's really hard to say, but we can talk one off if you have any more specific questions on that.
I want to ask Mike, what should I fund into the trust?
Yeah, so most times I recommend doing everything but retirement accounts. Like Yousaf was saying, there are huge tax detriments if you put the trust as a beneficiary on those accounts. But yeah, you can put most or all your other assets, like your house, of course. Your bank accounts are a good idea.
How about stocks and how about stocks like Fidelity?
Yeah, normally you can put non-retirement stocks into the trust, or people a lot of times also have beneficiary on accounts. So if you have beneficiaries on accounts and you're happy with those beneficiaries, a lot of times those don't typically have to go in the trust, but those can.
But do the company help you do it, or?
Yeah, normally each company like Fidelity will have their own form that you fill out to transfer your assets in the trust, and then a lot of times they'll want to see a copy of like a certification trust. A lot of times attorneys will prepare and that they can show the institution.
I can kind of chime in on
Yeah,
that
go
too.
ahead.
So we do that all the time. So clients come to us and we put their investment assets into a trust. It's a good idea to just sort of have everything under one place, so it makes it easier for your beneficiaries or your successors in the trust to really get access to the money. But the process is really simple. Once you give us a copy of your trust paperwork, or we usually, to Mike's point, we'll have you fill out a trust certification form where you put in the information of the trust, we get it notarized, and then we put it on the account. Super simple. Takes half a day sometimes, or a day. It's very simple. So if you don't have it and you want it to be in the trust, it's not a hard process to do.
Okay, I have a question. You mentioned about the IRA. I have a traditional IRA. Is it better to convert them to a Roth IRA?
Well, it depends. Everyone's situation is different, and what you have to consider when you do conversions from a traditional to a Roth is what your current income tax looks like, and what tax bracket you're in, what your adjusted gross income, and so on, where you're standing with your current situation, and then where you're going to be. If you're doing it for RMD purposes, you have to consider where you're going to be at 73 now. So if you're going to be at a higher tax bracket at 73, then maybe, because then you can get a tax break a little later. If you're going to be in maybe a similar situation, or if you potentially are going to make less when you're 73, then probably not worth it all too much to do the Roth conversion. It just really depends. That's kind of a really personal question based on your current income tax and what your projected income looks like.
Okay. Just recently coming to the seminar, I hear more and more about charitable annuity. How does that work?
Much more about what?
Charity annuity.
Yes. So those can be set up, and they're a great way, again, as I mentioned, for income streams for those, for yourself or for people that you love while you're still living. A lot of charities actually can set those up. I know many of the hospitals set those up. If you are giving to Sutter, for example, I know they have a great program that can be set up. Do you set those up as well too?
So what we do, we have there's really, I think, two different kinds: the charitable annuity trust, and there's a unit trust.
Unit trust, yeah.
So depending on your situation, you figure out which one really makes the most sense. And then you figure out if you want the income, or if you want some income now, or if you wanted the income to be deferred. And then that's really how you figure out. If it makes sense to put it in one of those, in one of the annuity type of charitable trusts or the unit trusts.
Is the interest rate higher for charity annuity?
Well, no, it's not.
No,
So inside the charitable annuity trust or the unit trust, you can choose the investments. You can choose what's in there. So it depends what the current market is. You can choose what's in there. It's not a fixed product that's in those trusts. It's more of a shell, and then inside of that shell annuity, it's called an annuity trust, but it's not an annuity that you get immediately. You have to find an investment, and an investment advisor or somebody can help you kind of figure out what to put in there and figure out what investments will yield you whatever you're looking for. So it's not a specific rate of return that's on there immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there a typical amount you see, Jennifer? Like a lot of times my clients want to donate to like ACC or like my sister's house. Is there a typical amount where it would make it worth it to come see you?
Well, and actually what we do, our Thompson Associates partners with the nonprofit. And
Okay.
actually we partner with like ACC, and then all of the members, all of their supporters have this available to them.
Okay.
But it's supported by the nonprofit. And no, there's not a certain amount. We do small estates, we do large estates. We look at things in all different ways. I've done estates that are 150,000 and estates that are 50 million. So there's all different unique ways you can do no matter what the size of the estate is.
So how would one of my typical clients get started? Like say I see that they want to donate to a charity. Would I contact like ACC and they'll get in touch, or how does it?
Yeah, so
normally
we
work?
work through the nonprofit. So
Okay.
we would work through ACC and see how that we can contract that so that we can
Got it.
support all of the members. Yes.
So a lot of times it's while they're alive. Is that correct? Versus when they pass away. Is that the main difference?
Right, so
you
we
work?
sit down and we work with individuals or couples and walk them through, look at their existing estate plan. Many times people think their existing estate plan, is all, summed up, kind of like I just said, it has all the right things in it. And it's so interesting once you run the numbers, and that's what we do, is we actually run your specific numbers and then show you exactly what percentage is going to the government and how we can be creative and utilize a different set of tools in order to shift some of those expenses into more of a charitable look
Got it. Okay.
at the time that you're living, and then obviously once you pass as well too.
And one more point with those is at least from our perspective, when it comes to those charitable annuities or the unit trusts, you can, Jennifer mentioned this earlier, you can put appreciated assets in those. And there's rules around how much ends up going to the organization at the end, and then how much goes to you, and how much you have to take out as a withdrawal rate every single year, and so on. But you can put appreciated assets. Some people even put business interests if they're trying to pass on business interests over to another family member, and sometimes that's a little more tax efficient. So what you can put in there is pretty flexible. And then once it's in there, what you can invest in afterwards is also flexible. So it's a great product.
And to that point, I mean, everything is so unique. Every individual, every couple is so unique based on so many of those things. One other thing on the RMD, while it is required now at 73, still at 71.5, you can make gifts and transfer those to charities. It's still at that 71.5 as well, even though you don't have to until 73, just as Yousaf said, for sure. And it's up to $100,000 on an annual basis. So you don't have to take just what you're required. You can go up to $100,000 individually.
I didn't know that. Thanks. That's cool.
One of the assets that people have is their property, their homes and so forth, and I'm just wondering about the tax differences in how property gets transferred when that happens. For example, when somebody's older, maybe they move to assisted living, and is that the time to transfer houses over to kids, or is that the time to sell the house, or is, what if you wait until you pass away? I'm wondering if you could provide any advice on that.
Well, there's two things to always think about, that every individual has two times where they can make this transfer, where it can be essentially tax-free. So let's say, for example, you want to transfer, so let's just say, I'm just gonna say at time of death. At time of death, I die and my house is worth $1 million, but we bought it at $100,000. It gets transferred over to my husband. And so normally, you'd have this capital gains if you were to sell the house. So you would not want to sell the house. So that $900,000, as it transfers over to my husband, that's where that marital deduction happens. Then it can happen one more time for my husband down to our kids, say, for example. And so what happens when the house is transferred over, you get a new step up, thank you, I'm sorry, and you have it appraised, and that becomes the new value. And then maybe that new value is something that makes sense to sell it at that point. And the same thing happens when you transfer it to your heirs. They can do that at that point too. And it's always a good thing to remember, because a lot of times people don't realize to go get that appraisal at that moment when that happens, because that becomes the new value. And you don't want to wait for that value to go up again, so that becomes another delta in that capital gains. If that helps answer that question.
Jennifer, you described, I believe, the estate planning process. How do you price that? Is it a fixed price, or?
So what we do, it's really unique. So we actually partner with nonprofits. That's actually our partner. And then the nonprofit entity actually provides that free. Completely of no cost to its members, to its supporters, constituents. So it's a contract that we do with the nonprofit. And as you probably know, estate planning can be anywhere, depending on the size of an estate, from $1,000 to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on that size. So what's really neat about this program, and like I said, I kind of sat on the other side of it for 13 years and utilized Thompson Associates. I was their client, and it really was an amazing, amazing opportunity for our donors, our supporters, to be able to go through the process. Because it is so value-based, it's not just about numbers, it's about really going through the process of what you want together as a couple or individual with your family. And so, but it is a partnership with the nonprofit, and then we're able to provide that where there's no cost then to all of their supporters.
That's great.
So in terms of financial planning, I'm wondering if you have conversations with clients having to do with the potential for long-term care. I know my wife and we have 3 parents all in long-term care in different forms, and it can be very expensive. And I could see myself, it would be great to pass on money while I'm still living, but then there's that risk. What if I need a long-term care for an extended period of time? How much risk do I want to take in doing that? Or maybe I should just wait till I pass away. I'm just wondering if there are guidelines or any comments you might have on that.
You're saying if you get a long-term care policy, if you don't use it? I don't think I understand.
I think he's worried about how much to invest. How much
Just
to give to
how
your
much
kids,
of a policy?
if you-
How much? Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, one way to pass on your wealth is when you pass away. And so you keep more of it with you throughout your life. The other way, which is kind of nice, and it's something in my family that's was done, where some of it was passed on to the kids while my parents were still alive, which is very nice. One of the things, though, that you have to think about, and at least I've found out and learned, is that you have this risk of, what if I run out of money because long-term care costs were so high that I didn't realize, even sometimes with insurance, if you want to stay in your own home and have caregivers, what I found is that, it can be quite expensive, and it's something to think about. So I just wondering, I don't know if there's what I'm asking,
No,
if there's
it makes sense.
guidelines or thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, makes sense. So what we do at the initial planning process when it comes to long-term care, we project out how much of a policy you can purchase really big policies or small policies. It really depends on how much of a policy you're looking for and what sort of concerns you potentially have. So we figure out how much coverage it has for different sort of situations, whether that be for skilled nursing or at-home care or what have you. And then we figure out how much of the policy do you want covered. If you want 100% covered, some people want just 50% covered, and then that way their premiums are less, and then they'll self-insure for the remaining of it. So you can make it to where you're insured up to $20,000 a month, or $15,000 a month, or $5,000 a month. So it's really adjustable based on how much of a policy you really want or need. And then if you have a high enough policy, and a lot of policies will actually adjust with inflation, so they'll increase in value over time to account for the increased cost of care. So you can get the policy for however much really you feel comfortable with, and if you don't get a big enough policy because you don't want to pay as much of a premium for it, then you have to self-insure. And if you self-insure, and if it's not enough, you could, if you don't have enough assets to self-insure, you could potentially run out. So that's when you make sure you get a big enough policy to where you're covered. And then there's actually some hybrid policies that sort of incorporate annuities that you can pay into, and then a portion of it that's unused will actually go to your beneficiaries. So it's a long-term care policy, but there's some cash value that gets built up so that not all of the money sort of goes to waste, and then whatever's left, if it's not used, then it goes to your beneficiaries. But to answer your questions, in the financial planning process, we figure out how much of a policy you potentially would need, and then we'll give you a few different options, and then we'll figure out what the premium is for the different ones, and then see the affordability of it. Yeah.
And there's some questions in the chat box there, Sean? Or?
No, these are my contact info.
Oh, got it. Okay, we'll have those. Oh yeah.
Could you elaborate on the RMD for inheritance?
Yeah. So.
If my son inherits or my wife inherits, are they taxed, or how's that work?
So, so the new rule with RMDs, I think maybe Jennifer might know a little more too on this. So with spousal, if there's a big age gap, then they have to take it within that 10-year mark. If the age gap isn't all too big, or is it the other way around? Do you know that part, the age gap part of it for the spouse?
If it's too big, I'm going backwards here. It's a certain age gap, but it's based on who you are and when they could assess when you would pass. And so there's a certain gap that each individual heir is looked at, and there is the tenure. Like for me, if I were to inherit the IRA right now from my parents, say, I could do that over a stretch of 10 years, but it would have to be over 10 years, and everything that I pull from on an annual basis would be against my tax bracket, so the income tax would be what I would pay. There is a gap, I believe it's 21 and under, and then 21 and over. After 21 and over, then there is a time period that it has to be taken. But there is a big tax. That's the biggest one that I see that we utilize as the charitable tool. I have a lot of clients, they'll look and they'll say, I've got lump sum of money here, we've got life insurance policies, all these things that are not taxable. And then when we look at the IRA, the retirement accounts, those are the ones that some were upwards to 50. I even had a client that had 60% and said, I'd rather figure out a way to give that to charity and do something different over here for my children and teach them that spirit of philanthropy. That's a lot of things that come into this discussion, is how to create that legacy, because that's the biggest tax implication that your heirs will have.
And those rules really went into place because Uncle Sam really just wants their tax dollars back. So there's no way to really avoid it altogether. You can try to do that stretch of the 10 years, but eventually the heirs, the kids, they will have to pay the tax bill. So it's kind of a balancing act as far as, if they're younger, maybe it is a good idea for them to take it early on if they're not making a lot of income, versus maybe in their mid-30s if they're getting it for younger kids and they start making a lot more money, then getting a tax at that point. So you have to figure out what age bracket they're in, and then either you tell them how to maybe distribute it, or you can create those trust-deed IRAs that then you can tell them, or you can tell the fiduciary of those IRAs or the custodian of those IRAs how to pay it out to your beneficiaries to make it the most tax-efficient way possible.
That's a good way to do it.
There's no time frame to spend it.
Uh,
Like inheritance.
with the RMD,
No, because you're paying tax into it, right? And so those are tools we wouldn't even use because they're not taxable to your heirs. So we wouldn't even include those. You'd want to just Yes.
but aren't do they
But-
still have to take it out within the 10 years with the Roth? I feel like I
That
read.
might be part of the
Yeah.
new rule. I haven't heard that yet.
Okay.
We just don't. We advise not to touch them because they're. You're already paid the taxes going in, so there might be small implications, but your traditional IRAs.
Might have to take it out of Roth.
So I think I read in the 2.0 part of the Secure Act that even though it's a Roth and it's not taxed, they still have to take it out within 10 years. But I'm not 100% positive, so I can get back to you on that. But even if they take it out, it wouldn't be taxed. It would just they would have to take it out within the time frame. But I'm not 100% positive on that, so I'll have to check.
The 10-year rule is recent, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, that's
5
what-
years ago.
That's why we keep going back and
Yeah,
forth
yeah.
at
Yeah.
2.0,
I
and it
think 5
changes
years
all the
ago,
time.
A lot of accounts are grandfathered in, so you don't have to take 10 years.
Some are grandfathered in. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think prior to 5 years ago.
Yeah, there's some. It's pretty strict anymore.
It just depends on your age. It depends on your age, and for it just really depends on your age. Yeah.
We make sure when we do the planning that we make sure we have all the answers for
Yeah,
you.
it's
Get
just-
all of the advisors and legal advice
Yeah.
so that when we create your final blueprint plan, at least on our end, that we've got all the details and you know exactly what that tax
Yeah.
number would be. You know, if something happened today.
Do you guys have business cards? Do you have business cards? So
Yeah, I brought some
Yeah.
business cards.
Yep,
I
I brought
think
some too.
if we put our last slide
Yeah.
up there,
Yeah.
Sean, would be good with our.
One other thing I'll point out, because I personally came across this, when you have beneficiaries and if you are a blended family, make sure to look at everything and that everything is in order. For example, before we had everything completely buttoned up, if I were to pass, my IRA would go to my husband, but then when he passed, the beneficiaries were only going to his biological children. And we did not realize that until years ago when we kind of dove in deep. So there are things just to look at. That's a lot of the things that we look at to make sure your beneficiaries are in the right order, exactly the way you want.
And as you can see, we have our contact information for everyone up, and then yeah. That's it.
All right.
Very good.
Well, thank you guys. We appreciate you participating.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.